Today we're going to look at one of the most creepiest locations in America that you should never explore alone, the Waverly Hills Sanitorium. There are many secrets and history behind the doors of this building, leaving it one of the most notorious and creepiest sanatoriums in America, having said to have over 50,000 deaths pass through its doors. We are going to shed some light on some of the history that this place holds and the things that this place could have been, which would have changed the structure itself and possibly the history. Okay, let's get started in today's location. The land that the Waverly Hills Sanatorium presently sits on is located in Louisville, Kentucky, and was purchased in 1883 by Major Thomas H. Hayes, which the Hayes family would build their new home on this land on top of this hill and start a new life there. Since their home was so far from any other school that their daughter could attend, Mr. Hayes decided to build one of his own, a one-room schoolhouse, so his daughter could attend. Mr. Hayes would hire Lizzie Lee Harris as the teacher of this new one-room schoolhouse. You know, kind of like the ones that you see in the movies. Lizzie enjoyed Walter Scott's Waverly novels so much that she would end up naming the school Waverly School. Then Mr. Hayes enjoyed the name so much that he ended up naming his property Waverly Hill. Then later on, the property would be sold and bought by the Board of Tuberculosis Hospitals, which they would end up keeping the name and naming the new sanatorium they built on the location Waverly Hills Sanatorium. It was said that in the early 1900s, Kentucky's hospitals were overpacked and were very hard to manage as tuberculosis was such a problem with among the people, killing hundreds of thousands of people. By the end of the 1800s, 25% of all deaths in America came from tuberculosis, which, if you didn't know, was an airborne bacterial disease that ate away at a patient's lung tissue until it pretty much killed them. And Waverly Hills Sanatorium was built during these events. Originally opening its doors in 1910, it was a two-story wooden structure which had about 50 beds housing patients. It would quickly expand and become overcrowded, and they would end up building a 5-story concrete and brick structure in 1926 with 400 beds, which again would continue to grow in its patients. Because of this highly contagious disease, extreme measures were taken in effect to quarantine the patients and the staff, separating itself from the outside world. Waverly Hills was such a self-sufficient facility that they even had their own animals and would produce their own food. This building had a 537-foot long tunnel that would start from the first floor of the building and would go all the way to the bottom of the hill to the Dixie Highway. This tunnel was designed for the very purpose to transport the dead bodies out of the building and away from the patients seeing the dead bodies being carried out, as they knew that seeing all the dead bodies being carried out almost daily would impact the moral state of the minds of these patients. Before there were any vaccines to treat this contagious disease, patients would on many occasions be treated outside, as many thought that the fresh air would help with the patients, which in a way it kind of did, but would not be effective enough to save their lives. They would even do this during the freezing temps and even in the snow. They would spend most of their days on these iron beds trying to catch whatever breath that they could to survive. Now, when the vaccines were introduced, the amount of patients that were infected would start to be healed, and numbers would drop drastically. So much, in fact, that the sanatorium would end up closing its doors in 1961. But the pain and suffering that affected so many people here seemed to leave a stain on the walls of this place. Many say that as you walk through the doors of this location, you can feel the dread that something just didn't feel right. That you could feel that something so awful and horrible happened here, leaving a bad presence. And well, in truth, it did. In 1983, the hospital was bought for about $3 million by a man named J. Clifford Todd, who was a developer. He bought the building with the intentions of converting it into a minimum security prison for the state. But the plans would quickly be dropped as the neighbors in the area protested this idea, as they didn't want a prison in their neighborhood. And you can't blame them. Then in 1996, Robert Alberhaski bought Waverly Hills. Robert was part of this religious incorporation, and he had plans to construct the world's tallest statue of Jesus on this location, which this idea was inspired by the famous Christ the Redeemer statue, which sits on Corcovado Mountain in Rio de Janeiro. The cost would be about $4 million to build, but a year later the plan would fall apart and be canceled as they only raised $3,000. Today, Waverly Hills Sanatorium is owned by private investors who opened this historical building up to urban explorers and paranormal enthusiasts to explore and tour around. You can walk the long and dark hallways of this structure, exploring the hundreds of rooms, not knowing what you'll find around each corner. Would you explore this massive place alone in the dark? Let me know your comments below. Here's a little bit of history for you. Don't forget to subscribe. Peace, I love you, and as always, God bless.